How's it going, guys, and welcome to another video here. Axel Williams bringing back to you another video. I've had a shave since my last video, and today, guys, we're going to be talking about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Guys, you probably all remember the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Today, guys, we're going to be talking about exactly why, in my opinion, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the best TV show in British game show history. Now, there's a lot of TV shows out there, you know, over the years, Deal or No Deal, The Chase, Weakest Link, which I've always thought was probably the weakest link in TV British game shows. But in this video, guys, I'm going to go through the 3 reasons why I think Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the best TV show in Britain, or was, obviously, over the years. Also going to be talking about how it's developed and changed, obviously, with the new host, Jeremy Clarkson. Might even spare a thought as well for the coughing major, Charles Ingram. You might all know about that as well. Charles Ingram, who scammed Who Wants to Be a Millionaire out of the £1 million prize with his coughing tactic. But yes, guys, the top 3 reasons why, in my view, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the best British game show. Now, for me, these 3 reasons for me are absolutely set in stone for me. They're set in stone for me, these 3 reasons. Number 1 is the £1 million prize. Now, I know not a lot of people... I'd never seen anything like this before. For a start, just to start it off, I had never seen a quiz show in which you could win £1 million in Britain. You know, being English, watching quiz shows over the years, I've never seen a show where you can win £1 million. But yes, that £1 million prize. I know not a lot of people have ever gotten there. Obviously, during that, I think it was 14, 15 years of Chris Tarrant's spell hosting Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I think there was only 4 winners, was it? 4 winners of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I know it's not something that happens continuously, but it is the top prize, isn't it? The top prize is still £1 million. They are still giving away £1 million to individuals who, I wouldn't even say are clever enough, because sometimes the answers just fall on their lap. But for those who the answers do fall on their lap and obviously have a broad knowledge as well, there has been £1 million winners. But for me, that is the first reason why I think Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the greatest game show in Britain. And number two, for me, the second reason Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the greatest show in Great Britain is the background music. The background music for me is just fantastic. These 3 things culminate for me into what makes Who Wants to Be a Millionaire so great. But the background music, the tense background music for each question. You know, the first 5 questions, 1 to 1,000, you've got this kind of playful music, this fast-paced, playful music. But after that, from 1,000 to 32,000, you've got this very tense, daunting background track. And then it just continues until the £1 million question. Just to actually have to answer a question when you've got that music in the background. I always thought it would be really tense just being in the audience, just listening in. You'd be able to feel the fear of the person taking part, you know, in the contestant's chair. The music in the background really set the tone for this show and made each question feel almost like life and death. And the third reason for me is Chris Tarrant. Chris Tarrant was fantastic. I thought Chris Tarrant was a brilliant host for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He played the slow role really well. This is the best thing about Chris Tarrant for me, is even when you'd got a question right, he'd make it sound like you'd got it wrong, just to then throw that U-turn and say, you've just won £32,000, and then everyone, yay! But that, for me, that slow roll from Chris Tarrant was just brilliant at that. He really was brilliant at making the contestant feel like they were about to lose big money, or that they'd got a question wrong when actually they'd got it completely right. I mean, there was a couple of occasions where he'd do it on the £1 million question. I think there was a question, if you were to plant Quercus rubra, what would grow? I don't know how he knew this, but he got it right. The answer was trees. And Chris Tarrant literally went through every single answer and said, if you were to go for B, you'd have just lost £468,000. If you went for D, you would have just lost £468,000. And he literally went around all the answers. And obviously, when he read out the last one, he knew he'd won because it was the only one he hadn't read out. And it was like, that's just brilliant. Brilliant hosting and creating an atmosphere and creating that excitement and tense build-up for the £1 million question. Fantastic. Everything about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for me is just absolutely fantastic. The studio is just... It's quite intimidating, isn't it? I could imagine sitting in that chair and feeling quite intimidated when you're literally in this little bowl and you've got the audience on the outside of you. And it's just you and Chris Tarrant. it's called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You're playing for £1 million, and the quiz show literally makes you feel as though you're playing for £1 million, if you know what I mean. It makes you feel as on edge as possible, as nervous as possible, as scared as possible. And just watching it sometimes when the question goes from, black to orange, and then you're waiting for Chris Tarrant to say, is it right or is it wrong? And you've just got that ambient music in the background. Even watching it at home, and many of you will probably agree, you feel tense just watching it at home. So imagine sitting in that chair and waiting for it to turn green or turn, or for it to remain orange and then reveal the actual correct answer. It's such a gripping quiz show. And I've always appreciated just how good the atmosphere was for that show. And before anybody asks, yes, Charles Ingram is 100% guilty. Charles Ingram was 100% guilty. I have watched that episode of his about probably 10, 15 times over the past so many years. And the best thing is about Charles Ingram, him and Diana Ingram, his wife, and Tequin Whittock. I haven't actually heard too much of Tequin Whittock. Tequin Whittock was the guy who was coughing him the answers. But in terms of Diana Ingram and Charles Ingram, they appeared on, I think it was this morning. It's probably about 15, 20 years ago now. And it's probably about just over 20 years ago, in fact, when it happened. And they maintain their innocence they maintain their innocence then. I'm pretty sure Charles Ingram and Diana maintain their innocence to this day. But when you watch it back, when you watch the tapes back, when you watch the clips back of him making those huge U-turns, he's guilty as sin. He's as guilty as Hitler. I think the best example of his guilt has got to be A1 and Craig David. Now, he'd heard of A1. It was narrowed down to a 50-50. He'd used 50-50, one of his 50-50 lifeline, and he had narrowed it down to A1 or Craig David. He self-admitted he thought it was A1. He'd never heard of Craig David. But his logic was, I'm wrong 90% of the time when I guess, so I'm going to go Craig David. Okay, that's good logic, but this is never further highlighted than on the £1 million question. Now, I believe the £1 million question was something along the lines of a 1 followed by 100 zeros is known by what name? Google, Megatron, Gigabit, Nanomole. He would suffer a £468,000 drop had he got this question wrong. Obviously a £500,000 gain. There's not much of a difference between the loss and the gain here. Now, this is the thing. He thought it was initially a nanomole. Okay, you think it's a nanomole. He didn't know it was a nanomole. He got kind of overconfident in that moment and said nanomole. But then he takes a massive U-turn and goes for Google, simply because Tequin Whittock coughs obviously the correct answer for him. This is the thing. He maintains his innocence. Not one sane person on this planet. I mean, there's probably some insane people on this planet that would have gone through it in that hope that they got the £1 million for, getting greedy, if you know what I mean. They would have just gambled and gone for the million. You see it sometimes on the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in the USA. I've seen it. Now, when you're sitting on £500,000, you don't just come to the rationalisation that it must be a Google because it's the only one I've never heard of. That was his logic. I've never heard of a Google, so by process of elimination, it must be a Google. You don't risk £468,000 on a strategy that's that stupid. But, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire had some brilliant moments over the years. I'd probably include that as an iconic moment in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, to be honest with you. The coughing major, the millionaire winners, obviously, over the years. And which takes me on to Jeremy Clarkson. He's as stiff as a board, honestly. He is, for me, I know Chris Tarrant's a lot to live up to. He's a very difficult host in terms of, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire stage to live up to. But Jeremy Clarkson, for me, he's just dull as rocks. He's as dull as rocks. I've never, ever got along with him. I think he's terrible. He's a terrible, stiff, board-like host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I remember when he actually read out an answer to a question once, and it ended up being the wrong answer. He actually read out the wrong answer. It was actually another answer that was actually right, and he got it wrong even though he's reading off his screen. His screen tells him what the correct answer is, and he still read it wrong, which is kind of a double whammy for the contestant, really, because the contestant has that euphoria of thinking, yes, I've just won big money, I've just won more money, and then all of a sudden they have that come down of despair where it's like, no, sorry, I've read it out wrong, and it's like, what? You've actually lost? Oh my God. But yeah, I mean, Jeremy Clarkson, I've always found him to be a wooden, stiff host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I think he's so dull, and the atmosphere in the show is terrible now as well. The way he reads the questions out, some people some people will say that's not really that important, you know, it's not really a big thing, but I think it is a big thing. Chris Tarrant used to read out the questions in a certain way. He used to add tension to the questions. Jeremy Clarkson's just kind of reading out like he's reading the back page of the newspaper. He's like, do you think it's a... There's no life to it. There's no life to the modern Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But no, what a great show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was. I've always liked it. I've always thought it was absolutely fantastic. Probably my favourite TV show here in this country, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Guys, have your say on it. Do you like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Do you think it's a fantastic show? Is it your favourite show? Do you like Deal or No Deal? Do you like The Chase? Are you a fan of The Weakest Link? Bullseye back in the day. I remember the Bullseye, the old darts TV show. Speaking of dull, yeah, that was probably... that was actually a kind of like a good sleeping pill, that show was for me. I always used to find it very, very relaxing to watch because it was so boring. But some people love it, and obviously I am a darts fan, actually. I am a big darts fan, so, you know, but no, that show for me just put me to sleep. But anyway, guys, what TV shows do you like? Do you agree Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Might as well throw the question in there. Is Charles Ingram guilty? Of course he's guilty, though, isn't he? You know, happened 20-odd years ago now. We all know he's guilty. Jeremy Clarkson or Chris Tarrant is a good question, guys. Do you prefer Jeremy Clarkson or Chris Tarrant as the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire host? For me, it's without a doubt A-lister Chris Tarrant. What is your thoughts and what is your favourite TV show? Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel and like the video, of course. And I will see you for another video very shortly. Guys, take care. I'll see you soon.